"You're my husband now," said the Apache girl after the bounty hunter chose not to kill her. The sun was harsh and unforgiving that afternoon, casting long shadows over the dusty plains. The small town at the edge of the wilderness seemed almost deserted, except for the occasional tumbleweed rolling lazily across the dirt roads. In the distance, the hills rose like silent sentinels, jagged and unyielding, hiding secrets that few dared to uncover. Among those secrets was a story that was about to begin, one that would test courage, patience, and an unexpected sense of morality. The bounty hunter rode alone, a solitary figure against the endless stretch of land. His horse, lean but strong, moved steadily, its hooves kicking up small clouds of dust with every step. The man himself was dressed in worn leather, a wide-brimmed hat shielding his face from the glaring sun. His eyes, sharp and alert, scanned every movement in the distance. He had been tracking the same outlaw gang for weeks, following their trail through towns, rivers, and forests. Every clue had led him here to this quiet, lonely stretch of wilderness. Despite the monotony of the landscape, his mind was alert, ready for anything. He had learned long ago that survival in the West required more than courage. It required patience, observation, and the ability to judge people quickly. He had faced men and women who would lie, steal, and fight without a second thought. Yet he had also learned that there were times when mercy could be more powerful than violence, though admitting it was never easy. The wind carried the scent of sage and dust, and he inhaled it deeply, preparing himself for what he might find ahead. Hidden among the distant hills was an Apache camp. From the edge of the plain, it seemed quiet, almost peaceful. Smoke curled from a few small fires, and the faint sound of voices reached his ears, carried by the wind. He knew better than to believe the calmness was genuine. Outlaws often sought refuge in places like these, relying on the terrain and local knowledge to escape the law. The bounty hunter slowed his horse, letting it pick its steps carefully among the uneven rocks. Every muscle in his body was tense, ready for action, yet disciplined enough to remain calm. He had a reputation for being deadly accurate with both words and weapons, and he intended to live up to it. As he approached, he noticed movement near one of the fires. At first, he thought it was an adult man, perhaps a guard or a scout. But as he drew closer, he realized it was a young girl. She was small, her dark hair tied back with simple leather cords, her eyes wide and alert. She carried no visible weapon, but her posture suggested readiness and confidence that belied her size. There was something about her presence that made him pause for the briefest of moments, a sense of life and spirit that was difficult to ignore. In that moment, he felt a curious tension, a mixture of professional caution and a subtle recognition that she was not an ordinary child. She had survived this harsh land, this unforgiving world, and that alone demanded respect. The girl noticed him as well. Her eyes locked on his, scanning him as carefully as he scanned her. She did not show fear immediately. Instead, there was a spark of defiance, a challenge that made the bounty hunter slow his approach. He had faced many who had tried to bluff their way through dangerous encounters, but there was something genuine in her gaze. He could sense intelligence, bravery, and a sharp understanding of the world around her. Despite the clear danger she was in, she did not tremble. She did not run. Instead, she stood her ground. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The wind shifted slightly, carrying the scent of the fires, the dry earth, and the faint tang of blood from some distant source he could not yet see. The bounty hunter's hand hovered near his side, ready to draw but not yet committing. He studied her movements, noting how she shifted her weight slightly, how her eyes darted to the surrounding area. She was alone, but she was alert. He realized that if he made a sudden move, she could escape, but he also understood that she might try to fight back if cornered. The unpredictability of her made the decision more complicated than he had anticipated. He remembered the training he had received years ago, the countless lessons about the value of patience and observation. In this world, a mistake could be fatal, whether it came from overconfidence, underestimating an opponent, or misjudging a situation. He allowed himself a moment to breathe, steadying his heartbeat and preparing for the next move. He had come to this land to bring justice, not to indulge whims, yet something in this encounter forced him to reconsider what justice meant. Was it simply taking a life, or was there more to it than that? He had killed before many times, but the question of whether he should kill this girl began to stir a rare hesitation. The girl, sensing his pause, tilted her head slightly. She understood that he was weighing his options, and she responded in kind with a display of courage that could either save her or doom her. Her defiance was not reckless, it was calculated. She had learned to survive in this harsh world by understanding people, by reading the slightest shifts in tone, posture, and expression. She knew that if she could convince him to hesitate, even for a moment, she might gain a chance at life. And so she stood tall, meeting his gaze steadily, her body relaxed but ready to act if necessary. Time seemed to stretch. The plain around them was quiet except for the occasional creak of the horse and the faint rustle of leaves in the breeze. Each was testing the other, understanding that the outcome of this encounter could change their lives forever. The bounty hunter could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. He had always believed in clear choices, right and wrong, kill or spare. But now, faced with this girl, he realized that the lines were not as distinct as he had imagined. He needed to decide, not just in terms of duty but in terms of conscience. Finally, the girl spoke, her voice calm but firm, breaking the silence. Though her words were few, they carried the strength of someone who had learned to survive against all odds. She did not plead or beg, but rather presented herself as an equal participant in this delicate exchange. Her tone suggested that she understood the power dynamics at play and was ready to assert her place in them. This unexpected confidence made the bounty hunter pause even further. He recognized that this was not just a moment of physical survival but a test of will and understanding between two very different people. The bounty hunter considered his options carefully. Killing her would be easy. She was small, alone, and had no apparent weapons. But he felt a strange reluctance, a sense that taking her life might not align with the deeper principles he had lived by for so many years. He had always seen himself as someone who brought balance, someone who administered justice where it was needed. And yet, in this case, justice was not clear-cut. He realized that every choice carried consequences, and sparing her life might set off a chain of events he could not yet predict. At the same time, he also understood that showing mercy could reveal a part of himself he had long hidden, a part capable of compassion and restraint. As he made his final approach, the girl remained still, unwavering in her courage. She had read his hesitation and knew that he had made a choice, even if he had not spoken it aloud. There was a subtle exchange in their eyes, a recognition that this moment would define both of them in ways neither could yet understand. The sun continued to beat down on the plain, highlighting the dust and grit on their faces, but neither flinched. They were two souls bound by circumstance, testing the boundaries of morality, courage, and survival. In the end, the bounty hunter chose not to act with violence. He made his decision quietly, without fanfare, acknowledging the humanity in the young girl before him. It was a moment that required no words, only a deep understanding that sometimes the right action was not the obvious one. The girl, sensing this shift, allowed herself a small, cautious exhale, recognizing that she had survived not through luck alone, but through a combination of bravery, intelligence, and the unexpected mercy of a man who had the power to end her life. The plains around them seemed to hold their breath. The fires of the distant camp flickered gently in the wind, as if observing the unspoken truce that had just been established. The bounty hunter and the girl remained on the edge of that silent understanding, aware that their lives were now connected in ways that neither had anticipated. Each had learned something valuable about the other, about the world, and about the fragile line between life and death. This moment marked the beginning of an extraordinary journey, one that would test every skill, every moral conviction, and every ounce of courage they possessed. The bounty hunter, who had spent years navigating a world of clear rules and harsh consequences, found himself facing uncertainty in a form he had never expected. The girl, who had survived through wit, bravery, and sheer determination, had encountered someone who could see her not just as a target, but as a person. And in that recognition, a bond, fragile, tentative, but undeniably real, was formed, setting the stage for the adventures and challenges that lay ahead. The moment the bounty hunter chose not to kill the young Apache girl, a quiet tension settled over the plain. Neither of them moved at first, each studying the other, as if trying to understand the consequences of what had just occurred. The girl, sensing that she had survived a moment that could have ended her life, allowed herself a slight smile, a small expression of relief mixed with curiosity. She had survived countless dangers before, but this encounter felt different. There was something about the man that was difficult to read, something that went beyond the usual rules of survival and violence she had learned to navigate. The bounty hunter, on the other hand, was caught in an unusual mix of relief and unease. He had faced life-and-death situations countless times, yet sparing someone's life, particularly someone so young, had shaken him more than he expected. He adjusted the strap of his leather satchel, feeling the weight of his weapons, his experience, and the years of decisions he had made. In that moment, he realized that life was rarely as simple as tracking and capturing outlaws. Sometimes it required judgment, patience, and a capacity for mercy that he had seldom needed to exercise. The girl, noticing his hesitation, took a careful step forward. She did not smile broadly, nor did she lower her guard. Instead, she spoke, her voice steady but firm. "You're my husband now." The words were startling, sharp against the stillness of the plains. The bounty hunter froze, unsure whether to be amused, annoyed, or disturbed. He had heard many strange things in his years on the road, but this declaration, spoken so confidently by someone so young, caught him completely off guard. For a brief moment, he said nothing, trying to process her statement. He studied her closely, noticing the seriousness in her eyes. This was not a childish game or a joke. In her culture, in her understanding of the world, she was claiming a connection, a responsibility that he could not easily dismiss. He had lived in a world of clear roles and expectations, and this was neither clear nor expected. The plains around them seemed to quiet in recognition of the tension. The wind rustled the dry grass and carried faint scents of the fires from her distant camp, but it did not dispel the strange, unspoken weight of her words. The girl continued, taking another careful step closer. "You spared my life," she said. "That means something." "That means you belong to me now?" Her tone carried a mixture of defiance and earnestness, a combination that made the bounty hunter's pulse quicken slightly. She was fearless, and she had learned that boldness could be a weapon in itself. In her eyes, the act of sparing her life was not just mercy, it was an invitation, a declaration that now bound him to her in some way. The bounty hunter's mind raced. He knew that accepting her claim could lead to complications, challenges, and dangers that he could not yet foresee. Yet at the same time, he felt an odd pull toward her words, as if this declaration were not just about her survival, but about a shared understanding of humanity. He had spent years moving from one dangerous situation to another, rarely forming connections, rarely allowing himself to be vulnerable. But in that moment, he sensed that this encounter might be different. It might challenge him in ways he had never anticipated. She studied him carefully, watching for a reaction. When she saw the hesitation in his eyes, she smiled slightly, a small but confident gesture. She knew that she had unsettled him, that she had disrupted the balance he had always maintained in his life. In her world, strength was measured not just by the ability to fight or survive, but by the ability to understand, to recognize the importance of bonds, and to act with courage even when the rules were unclear. She had survived by reading people as much as by reading the land, and now she was applying the same skill to him. The bounty hunter cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "You are bold," he said, his voice calm but firm, "and you are clever. Most people would not dare speak like that to someone like me." He paused, considering his next words carefully. "But words alone do not make such claims real. What you say, it does not change anything." He hoped that his response would be enough to deter her, to assert his independence, but he could sense her resolve was stronger than he had anticipated. She shook her head slightly, stepping closer again. "It does change something," she insisted, "because now you cannot leave me, you spared me, and that makes you mine. That is the law of what is right and what is brave." Her tone was firm, and though it was rooted in the beliefs of her people, it carried a universal truth that the bounty hunter could not ignore. She was not merely trying to manipulate him, she was expressing her understanding of honor, respect, and survival. For a moment, he considered walking away, turning his horse and leaving her in the plains. It would have been the easier choice, the choice he had always made when faced with uncertainty. But as he looked into her eyes, he realized that leaving her was not an option, not morally, not ethically, and perhaps not even practically. She had survived long enough to learn the ways of the land, and she was more capable than he initially believed. Leaving her alone might expose her to dangers that neither of them could control. He sighed quietly, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. This was no ordinary encounter. This was not a simple matter of capturing or sparing someone. This was about choices, consequences, and the fragile bonds that could form between two people under extraordinary circumstances. The girl's boldness had forced him to reconsider the rules he had always lived by, the code he had always followed. For the first time in years, he realized that survival alone was not enough. Humanity, courage, and understanding mattered just as much. The girl, sensing that he was no longer entirely resistant to her words, smiled faintly but did not relax. She knew that trust could not be demanded, it had to be earned. And she understood that this man, for all his experience and skill, was capable of both great action and deep restraint. She decided to test him further, not with words, but with a simple, deliberate act. She took a step closer and allowed herself to appear vulnerable, showing him that she trusted him in that moment. The bounty hunter noticed the shift immediately. He realized that her trust, though tentative, was significant. It was not blind or naive. It was a careful, measured choice made by someone who had faced danger and survived. He felt a surprising sense of respect for her, the kind that only comes when someone demonstrates both courage and intelligence. The plains seemed to quiet around them, holding space for this fragile understanding that had begun to form. As they stood there, the bounty hunter began to consider the practical implications of the situation. Traveling alone in these lands was dangerous for anyone, especially a young girl. Outlaws, wild animals, and the unforgiving landscape itself posed constant threats. He realized that leaving her behind could be more dangerous than keeping her nearby, at least until they were both safely out of the immediate area. The logic was clear, but the emotional weight of the decision was not. He had rarely allowed himself to care for someone in this way, and yet here he was, weighing the life of a young girl against his own freedom and routine. Finally, he nodded slowly, almost imperceptibly, acknowledging her statement without committing fully to her declaration. "Very well," he said carefully, "I will not leave you. For now we travel together. But understand this, I do not make promises lightly, and I do not take claims of ownership seriously." His voice was calm but firm, and it carried both authority and a hint of curiosity. The girl's eyes sparkled with understanding, knowing that she had achieved a small but meaningful victory. She had survived, and she had compelled the bounty hunter to acknowledge her presence in his world. With the tension eased slightly, they began moving together, each cautious and alert. The bounty hunter rode slightly ahead, his eyes scanning the horizon for potential dangers, while the girl walked beside the horse, matching his pace with surprising grace. She was quiet for a time, observing the landscape, noting the patterns of the wind, the rustling of the grasses, and the distant movement of animals. Her survival instincts were finely tuned, and she was teaching him, silently, how to read the land with the same precision she had used to survive countless threats. As the day wore on, the bounty hunter found himself reflecting on the unusual turn of events. He had never imagined that a single encounter could carry so much weight, could challenge his beliefs, and could force him to reconsider the rules he had lived by for so long. The girl's audacity, courage, and intelligence had unsettled him, but it had also sparked a sense of curiosity and perhaps even admiration. He realized that the bond forming between them was not simply about survival. It was about understanding, respect, and the unexpected ways human connections could arise even in the harshest circumstances. By the time the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the plains in shades of gold and orange, the bounty hunter and the girl had established a tentative rhythm. They moved cautiously, aware of the dangers that might appear at any moment, yet gradually learning to rely on each other's presence. The girl's initial boldness had shifted from challenge to partnership, and the bounty hunter's initial hesitation had shifted from doubt to cautious acceptance. As night fell and the stars began to twinkle in the clear sky, the two of them made camp near a small grove of trees. The bounty hunter tended the fire while the girl gathered some dry twigs and leaves, careful not to disturb the surrounding environment. They did not speak much, but the silence was comfortable rather than tense. Both understood that words were not always necessary. Actions, attention, and presence often communicated far more than speech. The night stretched on, filled with the sounds of crickets, distant owls, and the occasional rustle of small animals. The bounty hunter found himself reflecting on the strange twist of fate that had brought him here. He had expected a simple mission, a straightforward task, but life had a way of complicating even the most predictable paths. And perhaps, he thought, the complexity of this encounter was exactly what he needed, to remind him that survival alone was not enough, that understanding, mercy, and connection were equally vital. The girl, lying beside the fire with her eyes on the stars, felt a similar realization. She had survived countless dangers, yet this encounter had introduced a new dimension to her life. She had met someone who could both threaten and protect her, someone whose choices carried weight and meaning. She understood that their journey together would be difficult, that challenges lay ahead, but she also sensed that this partnership, unexpected as it was, could shape her future in ways she had never imagined. The morning sun broke over the horizon, casting long streaks of gold across the plains. The bounty hunter and the Apache girl had packed their minimal belongings, each of them silently preparing for another day on the move. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of earth and sage, a reminder that the land was alive with challenges for those who dared to traverse it. Both had learned that surviving in this wilderness required more than skill. It required observation, patience, and trust in ways they had not expected. The bounty hunter mounted his horse, checking the leather straps and the saddle. His eyes scanned the surroundings, noting small signs of movement in the distant hills, the subtle tracks of animals, and faint disturbances in the dust that might reveal hidden threats. The girl walked beside him, moving gracefully despite the rough terrain, her eyes constantly observing the environment. Though she was smaller, she had an uncanny ability to detect danger, a skill honed by years of navigating the wilderness and evading threats. Their journey together was far from easy, but both were learning to rely on each other in ways neither had anticipated. For the bounty hunter, this partnership was unusual. He had always traveled alone, relying solely on his instincts and experience. He was used to making decisions without consulting anyone, to taking action based on his own judgment. Yet now, with the girl by his side, he found himself considering her perspective, weighing her advice, and noticing her strengths. She could read the terrain in ways he sometimes overlooked, anticipate danger before it appeared, and think creatively when options seemed limited. It was a humbling experience, one that reminded him that survival was not just about physical skill, but also about collaboration and understanding. The girl, meanwhile, observed him with a mixture of curiosity and caution. She had survived on her own for years, relying on her wits, speed, and knowledge of the land. Yet she sensed that this man, for all his experience and skill, was not someone to underestimate. His calm demeanor, sharp instincts, and controlled movements revealed a depth of understanding she had rarely encountered. She realized that their survival depended on mutual respect and careful communication. Slowly, she began to see him not just as a protector or a threat, but as a partner in navigating the unpredictable challenges ahead. Their first test came sooner than expected. As they moved along a narrow path through a canyon, the sharp echo of footsteps reached their ears. The bounty hunter immediately dismounted, gesturing for the girl to do the same. He scanned the rocky walls, noting the shadows that might conceal enemies or animals. The girl crouched behind a boulder, her eyes wide and alert. They both understood the danger. Bandits or wild animals could appear at any moment, and a wrong move could have fatal consequences. The footsteps grew louder, and soon a small group of men appeared at the canyon entrance. They were rough-looking, armed with rifles and knives, clearly seeking trouble. The bounty hunter assessed them quickly, noting their posture, their expressions, and the potential threat they posed. The girl, watching him carefully, mirrored his assessment, her mind racing to anticipate their intentions. Together, they formed an unspoken strategy, positioning themselves behind rocks, observing and waiting for the right moment to act. When one of the men advanced too quickly, the bounty hunter acted with precision. A warning shot rang out, causing the group to halt. He spoke firmly, his voice carrying across the canyon. "Turn back. You do not want this fight?" His tone was calm but authoritative, leaving no room for argument. The girl, understanding the subtle signal, stepped slightly forward, showing confidence and readiness. The combination of his skill and her presence created a sense of strength that surprised the bandits. After a tense moment, the men hesitated, then retreated slowly, clearly unwilling to challenge the bounty hunter and his unexpected companion. As the echoes of their departure faded, the girl allowed herself a small sigh of relief. She glanced at the bounty hunter, her expression a mix of admiration and caution. "You handled them well," she said quietly, "but we must keep moving." "More could come?" The bounty hunter nodded, acknowledging her insight. Her awareness of danger had saved them from potential harm, reinforcing the delicate balance of trust and teamwork they were building. The journey continued through forests, streams, and open plains, each section presenting its own set of challenges. The girl showed him how to find edible plants, identify fresh water, and move quietly to avoid attracting attention. She taught him subtle signs in nature, the way birds reacted to danger, the patterns of footprints, and the shifting of wind through the trees. In return, the bounty hunter shared lessons of strategy, self-defense, and survival tactics he had learned over decades. Slowly, a rhythm formed between them, a partnership rooted in mutual respect and necessity. Yet the journey was not without conflict. Differences in approach often led to tension. The girl preferred to move quickly and take calculated risks, while the bounty hunter favored patience, observation, and careful planning. There were moments when frustration flared, when the girl ignored caution, or when he insisted on prolonged stops, but each disagreement was followed by reflection. Over time, they learned to balance each other's strengths and weaknesses. The bounty hunter came to appreciate her boldness and adaptability, while she learned to respect his experience and measured decision-making. One evening, as they camped near a small creek, a storm began to roll in. Dark clouds gathered overhead, and strong winds rattled the sparse trees. They hurried to secure their supplies and find shelter, their movements synchronized through practice and mutual understanding. The girl helped gather firewood and secure their tent, while the bounty hunter reinforced the structure and ensured the fire remained protected. The storm raged around them, but within their small shelter, a sense of calm prevailed. They had learned to rely on each other, not just for survival, but for comfort and reassurance amidst the unpredictability of the wilderness. During the quiet moments after the storm, conversation began to flow more freely. The girl spoke of her past, of the hardships she had faced, and the lessons she had learned from surviving in a world that was often cruel. She shared stories of her family, her tribe, and the values that had guided her life. The bounty hunter listened attentively, occasionally offering insights from his own experiences. He spoke of loneliness, of the choices he had made, and of the moral challenges that came with a life spent navigating danger. These conversations, though sparse and measured, created a bond that went beyond survival. They were learning to understand each other's hearts and minds. As days turned into weeks, their skills and trust grew stronger. They learned to anticipate each other's actions, to communicate without words, and to rely on instincts sharpened by experience and observation. The bounty hunter found himself admiring the girl's courage, intelligence, and resilience. She, in turn, respected his integrity, calm reasoning, and the quiet strength that underpinned every action he took. What began as a relationship of necessity was evolving into a partnership of mutual respect, shaped by shared challenges and triumphs over adversity. Yet challenges continued to test them. One afternoon, they encountered a sudden landslide in a narrow canyon. Rocks and debris tumbled down with thunderous force, threatening to trap or injure them. The bounty hunter reacted immediately, pulling the girl to safety behind a large boulder. She clung to him for balance, but quickly regained her composure, helping him navigate the dangerous path. Together, they moved with precision, combining his experience with her agility. When they reached a safe area, both were breathless but uninjured, their trust in each other strengthened by the ordeal. As night fell, they settled near a small grove, exhausted but alive. The bounty hunter studied the girl's face by the firelight, noticing how determination and resilience had shaped her expression. He realized that the bond they were forming was not merely a product of circumstance. It was a result of respect, shared danger, and the recognition that survival often required partnership. The girl, sitting beside him, glanced up at the stars, reflecting on the journey they had shared so far. She understood that the trust she had placed in him had been met with responsibility and care, a rare combination in a world that often offered neither. Over time, their conversations grew more personal. The girl asked about his past, the reasons he had become a bounty hunter, and the choices that had defined him. He responded cautiously at first, revealing only fragments of his story but gradually shared more. He spoke of the loneliness he had endured, the challenges of upholding justice, and the moments when mercy had seemed both impossible and necessary. In turn, she spoke of hope, survival, and the belief that courage could shape outcomes even in the most difficult circumstances. These exchanges deepened their understanding, revealing that the bond between them was more than practicality, it was connection. Their journey continued, each day blending challenges, learning, and growth. They faced harsh terrain, unpredictable weather, and the constant threat of hostile encounters. Yet through every obstacle, they discovered a rhythm. The girl's intuition and agility complemented the bounty hunter's experience and strategy. Together, they navigated dangers that would have been insurmountable alone. Each shared victory, small or large, reinforced the unspoken agreement that they were stronger together. By the time they reached a wide, open valley, their partnership had transformed into something resilient. They had learned to anticipate danger, communicate through subtle gestures, and trust instincts honed by experience and observation. The bounty hunter, once solitary and guarded, began to recognize the value of companionship and mutual respect. The girl, once wary of every person she encountered, found herself able to rely on someone without fear or doubt. Their journey had not only strengthened their skills, but also nurtured an unexpected emotional bond, laying the foundation for the challenges and choices that awaited them. The valley stretched out before them, wide and open, with gentle hills and a meandering river reflecting the morning sun. For a brief moment, the bounty hunter and the Apache girl allowed themselves to feel a sense of relief. The dangerous passages, the narrow canyons, and the harsh wilderness behind them seemed like a memory, though they both knew that danger never truly disappeared in this land. Even as the beauty of the valley greeted them, both remained alert, understanding that survival depended on constant vigilance, courage, and clear thinking. The girl walked beside the bounty hunter, her eyes scanning the terrain as usual. She had grown comfortable with the rhythm of their journey, aware of his instincts and habits, and he had learned to rely on her intuition and quick thinking. Though their partnership had begun under unusual circumstances, it had transformed into something deeper. They had learned to trust each other, to anticipate each other's movements, and to communicate in ways that required little spoken word. This trust, forged in danger and necessity, would be tested one final time. Suddenly, a distant shout cut through the quiet morning. Both of them froze, listening intently. The voice was familiar, rough, and threatening, the outlaw gang they had been tracking for weeks. The bounty hunter's eyes narrowed, scanning the hills and the riverbank for movement. The girl instinctively crouched, her hands hovering near the small weapons she carried. This was the moment they had feared, a confrontation that could determine the course of their journey and perhaps their very lives. The bounty hunter quickly assessed the situation. The outlaws were approaching from multiple directions, likely attempting to trap them in the open valley. He knew that a direct confrontation would be risky, especially with the girl beside him, but retreating was not an option. They had traveled too far, faced too many dangers, and grown too dependent on each other's skills to run now. He motioned for the girl to follow his lead and positioned himself behind a large rock formation, using it as cover. She crouched beside him, her eyes locked on his, ready to act as soon as he gave the signal. When the first outlaw appeared on the ridge, the bounty hunter acted with precision. He fired a warning shot, causing the man to pause and glance around nervously. The girl, observing the tension, noticed the terrain offered small advantages: fallen logs, uneven rocks, and shallow depressions that could be used to hide and maneuver. She pointed subtly, guiding him toward a safer position while maintaining her own cover. Together, they moved with coordination, each action reinforcing their trust and understanding. The confrontation escalated as more outlaws emerged, their numbers greater than anticipated. The bounty hunter remained calm, using his experience to anticipate their moves, while the girl relied on her agility and instincts to create diversions and identify weaknesses. They moved strategically, forcing the outlaws to split their focus and creating openings for escape or counteraction. Every decision, every movement, required precision and cooperation, and both relied on the unspoken bond that had grown between them. Despite the danger, the girl remained composed. She had survived countless threats before, but this was different. It was no longer just about evading capture. It was about standing together, defending each other, and proving that courage and trust could overcome even the most threatening odds. She moved silently, guiding the bounty hunter through hidden paths, pointing out obstacles and alerting him to potential ambushes. Her knowledge of the land and quick thinking allowed them to stay one step ahead, turning the valley's natural features into allies rather than obstacles. The bounty hunter, for his part, was impressed. He had faced men who relied on brute force, clever traps, and cunning strategy. But this young girl's combination of fearlessness, intelligence, and adaptability was extraordinary. He found himself relying on her in ways he had never imagined, recognizing that their survival depended on the synergy they had built over weeks of travel. In the heat of danger, he felt an unusual sense of partnership, a rare and valuable connection forged in trust and necessity. As the outlaws closed in, the bounty hunter realized that direct confrontation could be costly. Instead, he devised a plan, signaling the girl to follow his lead. Using the terrain to their advantage, they led the outlaws toward a narrow gorge where movement was restricted. The girl ran ahead slightly, drawing attention with subtle movements, while the bounty hunter positioned himself strategically to intercept anyone who pursued too closely. The plan worked. The outlaws, unfamiliar with the terrain, struggled to navigate the gorge efficiently, giving the pair a critical advantage. When one of the men attempted to rush them, the bounty hunter intercepted, forcing him to retreat. The girl, observing the distraction, moved to another vantage point, ready to act if needed. Their coordination was seamless, a culmination of the lessons, trust, and experience they had shared throughout their journey. By the time the sun reached its peak, the outlaws, frustrated and unable to outmaneuver them, retreated back into the hills. The valley fell silent once more, save for the sound of the wind and the distant river. Both the bounty hunter and the girl allowed themselves to breathe, realizing that they had survived a threat that might have been fatal on its own. Exhausted but triumphant, they settled near the riverbank to rest. The girl gathered water and small pieces of firewood while the bounty hunter repaired minor damages to his gear. They did not speak much, both understanding that words were not necessary. Actions and presence spoke volumes. The shared relief, pride, and understanding created a quiet moment of connection that neither had expected at the journey's start. As night approached, the bounty hunter finally spoke, his voice carrying a mix of exhaustion, reflection, and gratitude. "You are stronger than I first thought," he said quietly, not as praise, but as acknowledgement of her courage, intelligence, and resilience. The girl looked at him, her expression calm but thoughtful. "And you are not what I first thought either," she replied. "You are more than just a hunter of men. You can be someone who understands, who protects, and who trusts." Her words, though simple, carried deep meaning, marking a transformation in both of them. That night, as the stars illuminated the clear sky, they shared their first true conversation without tension or danger pressing down on them. The bounty hunter spoke of his past, how he had chosen a life of solitude, how he had relied on strength and skill, and how he had rarely allowed trust or connection to guide his choices. The girl listened intently, her presence calm and reassuring, and shared stories of her own life, her experiences with her family, the lessons she had learned from survival, and her understanding of bravery and honor. These exchanges deepened their bond, revealing that their relationship had grown beyond mere necessity. It had become a connection built on respect, understanding, and shared experiences. In the days that followed, they continued their journey, now with a new sense of purpose and mutual support. They navigated forests, plains, and hills with heightened awareness, their skills complementing each other perfectly. The girl's agility, observation, and knowledge of the land balanced the bounty hunter's strategy, planning, and experience. Together, they faced challenges that would have been insurmountable alone. Every encounter, every obstacle reinforced their connection and demonstrated the value of courage, trust, and cooperation. Eventually, the bounty hunter realized that the girl's earlier declaration, "You're my husband now," had taken on a new meaning. It was no longer a challenge, a bold claim, or a statement of survival. It had become symbolic of the partnership, trust, and bond they had developed through shared experiences and dangers. He understood that she was not claiming ownership, but acknowledging a connection forged in trust, mutual reliance, and respect. In a world often defined by violence, fear, and uncertainty, this bond was a rare and precious thing. As they reached the outskirts of a small settlement, both were aware that their journey together might be coming to an end. The bounty hunter would continue his work, tracking outlaws and navigating the harsh wilderness, while the girl might return to her people, her family, or continue surviving on her own. Yet neither saw this as a final separation. The connection they had formed was resilient, built on experience, understanding, and trust. They had changed each other, strengthened each other, and created a bond that could endure even distance and time. Before parting, the girl turned to the bounty hunter. Her eyes were steady, calm, and filled with unspoken gratitude. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice carrying the weight of everything they had endured together. The bounty hunter nodded, his expression reflecting both respect and recognition. "You taught me more than you know," he replied, "and I will not forget what we shared." With that, they went their separate ways, he riding toward the open plains, she walking toward her own path, but the experiences, lessons, and bond they had formed remained. The journey had begun with a life-and-death encounter, continued through trust, struggle, and understanding, and ended with respect, recognition, and transformation. Both had learned that courage, intelligence, and compassion could guide even the harshest paths. Both had discovered that bonds formed in adversity could endure, and that human connection, even in the most unlikely circumstances, was a powerful force. The valley, now quiet once more, bore witness to the growth, courage, and partnership of two people brought together by chance, challenged by danger, and forever changed by understanding and respect. The bounty hunter rode on, stronger, wiser, and more aware of the power of trust. The girl walked confidently, carrying lessons learned, courage strengthened, and a bond that would shape her future in ways she could not yet imagine. Their story, though ending in separation, remained a testament to bravery, wisdom, and the rare, transformative power of human connection.